The moment the dog saw him, he froze, then began crying so loudly the entire shelter fell silent. No one knew why until the man dropped to his knees, whispering a single name. What happened next was a miracle reunion that proved true loyalty never dies, even after years apart. In a quiet corner of the county animal shelter, a German Shepherd mix lay curled on a thin blanket. His fur was coarse and patchy in places, his ribs faintly visible beneath his coat. The volunteers called him Shadow, not because he followed anyone, but because he hardly made a sound. He was like a ghost behind the kennel bars, watching the world move past without him. Day after day, families came in, their voices bright with excitement as they browsed the rows of wagging tails and hopeful eyes. But when they reached Shadow's kennel, they often stopped short. Some frowned at his downcast gaze. Others murmured about his age or his scars. Shadow never barked or leapt against the gate to demand attention. Instead, he would simply lift his head a fraction, studying them as if searching for something, or someone, he no longer believed he would ever see again. At night, when the shelter fell silent except for the distant hum of the highway, Shadow would rest his chin on his paws and sigh long and weary. The staff had noticed that sound. It wasn't the impatient whimper of a dog wanting to go outside, nor the nervous pant of one afraid of confinement. It was the sound of resignation, a heart once full and loyal, now hollowed by loss. No one knew exactly who he was waiting for. But in Shadow's tired eyes, it was clear he hadn't given up hope completely. That morning, rain had been falling steadily, a soft drumming against the shelter's metal roof. It was nearly closing time when the front door swung open, bringing a gust of damp air and a man in a faded flannel jacket. Water dripped from the brim of his baseball cap as he paused on the threshold, glancing around as if unsure he belonged. "Can I help you?" asked Emily, the shelter's coordinator, stepping out from behind the counter. She'd been there for years and could always spot the difference between a casual visitor and someone searching for someone. I'm looking for a dog," the man said quietly. His voice was raw, like he hadn't spoken out loud in a long time. He hesitated, then pulled a crumpled photo from his pocket and unfolded it with care. Emily took it and saw a younger version of the German Shepherd, sitting proudly beside the same man. Both smiling in the bright summer sun. "His name was Shadow," the man said, his eyes fixed on the picture. "I lost him a few years back. He was everything to me." Emily felt her chest tighten. "We do have a German Shepherd here," she said gently. "I can show you." He nodded, unable to speak further. She led him down the long hallway lined with kennels. Dogs barked and pawed at the gates as they passed, eager for attention. But the man hardly noticed. His eyes darted from pen to pen, searching every corner. At the far end, Emily stopped in front of the last kennel. Inside, the German Shepherd lay as he always did, silent, still, waiting. The man took a trembling breath, staring through the bars. He dropped to his knees, rain dripping from his jacket onto the concrete floor. Pressing a hand against the chain-link door, his fingers curled around the cold metal. For a moment, neither of them moved. The dog kept his head low, as though afraid to believe his eyes. "Shadow," the man whispered, voice unsteady. "It's me. It's Danny." The German Shepherd's ears flicked forward. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he lifted his gaze to meet the man's. The shelter seemed to go silent. Every sound muffled beneath the weight of that single look. For a breathless instant, the world shrank down to just the two of them, separated only by a thin barrier of wire and years of heartbreak. Shadow's eyes widened. A tremor ran through his body. His tail twitched with something that looked almost like disbelief. Then, with a strangled whimper, he began to cry. The sound was raw and high-pitched, rising from deep inside him. Tears welled in his dark eyes, slipping down the gray fur of his muzzle. Emily had seen countless reunions in her years at the shelter, but never one like this. She pressed a hand to her mouth, her own eyes stinging. Other staff members stopped in the hallway, drawn by the unexpected sound of a dog weeping. Danny reached through the gap in the gate, his fingertips brushing the fur just beneath Shadow's collar. "I'm so sorry," he choked out, his voice breaking. "I tried to find you. I never stopped looking." Shadow inched closer until his wet nose pressed into the man's palm. He closed his eyes and let out another trembling cry, as if finally letting go of the years he'd spent waiting. Danny rested his forehead against the cold gate, his hands buried in Shadow's thick fur. Memories came flooding back so vividly they nearly knocked the breath from his lungs: the little house they'd shared, the creaky porch, the yard where Shadow chased butterflies in the summer. But it had all changed the night of the fire. Danny had woken to the choking smell of smoke, flames devouring the kitchen. He grabbed Shadow's leash and tried to escape, but the smoke was too thick. A neighbor dragged him outside, half-conscious. In the chaos, Shadow slipped free of his collar and vanished into the darkness. For months, Danny searched shelters, hung flyers, called every vet in the county. When no one reported finding a German Shepherd, he feared the worst. Losing Shadow wasn't just losing a pet, it was losing the last piece of his old life. Years passed. Danny moved into a small apartment and tried to rebuild. Still, he never stopped carrying that photo in his pocket, a reminder of happier times. When he finally heard about a shepherd matching Shadow's description picked up as a stray, he hadn't dared believe it. But now, seeing those familiar eyes brimming with tears, he knew Shadow had been searching too. Emily quietly unlocked the kennel door and stepped back. Danny barely noticed. His focus was on the dog who had once been his whole world. The moment the latch clicked open, Shadow hesitated, as if afraid this was only a dream. Then, one cautious step at a time, he moved forward until he was pressed against Danny's chest. Danny wrapped both arms around him, burying his face in Shadow's thick fur. The dog let out a long, shuddering sigh and rested his head on Danny's shoulder. For a while, neither of them moved. The years apart seemed to dissolve, replaced by the quiet certainty that they were finally home. A few feet away, Emily wiped her eyes. Other staff members stood silent, their hearts twisting at the sight. They all knew what it felt like to care for animals abandoned and forgotten, to hope they'd find their person again. But rarely did they see a reunion this raw and pure. After a while, Emily cleared her throat gently. "Take all the time you need," she said. "When you're ready, I'll bring the paperwork." Danny nodded, unable to trust his voice. He felt Shadow's heartbeat against his chest, strong and steady. He thought of the empty apartment he'd be going back to, and how, in just a few hours, it would no longer feel empty at all. Later that afternoon, Danny signed the adoption papers with a trembling hand. As they walked out into the weak autumn sunshine, Shadow stayed glued to his side, every step measured to match his. For the first time in years, Shadow lifted his head high, his tail wagging in slow, contented sweeps. They were together again, and this time, nothing would tear them apart.